this tutorial, you're going to learn how to configure CORS in your Spring Boot application. CORS is an HTTP header-based mechanism that allows you to specify in a flexible way what cross-domain requests should be authorized. You're going to learn how to configure CORS in Spring Boot at a controller, a method, and at a global level. We'll also discuss what you need to do to configure CORS when you bring Spring security into your application. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Dan Vega, and I'm a Spring developer advocate for VMware. I want to jump right in today, but as always, all of the resources that we're going to discuss and the GitHub repo for all of the code we're going to walk through today is in the description below. What are we waiting for? Let's write some code. We are going to get started with this demo like we do with everyone by heading over to start.spring.io. We're going to be creating a Maven project using Java. We'll use Java 17. I'll fill in some metadata here. You can fill in yours. I'm going to say dev.danvega is the group. The artifact is going to be CORS demo. So the only dependency that we'll need for right now is Spring Web. Again, we will bring in security bits in a little bit to talk about the security configuration, but I want to start with just the web application so we can take a look at CORS configuration before we get to the security stuff. So when you have that ready, go ahead and click on that Generate tab button down below. You'll download a zip. You can go ahead and open it up in your favorite IDE or text editor. I will go ahead and open it up in mine, IntelliJ. All right, so I'm a big fan of coffee. I've been using coffee domain in my tutorials lately. We're going to kind of continue with that today. So in my source main Java, I'm going to create a new package. We'll go ahead and call this model. And in here, we're going to create a new class. We'll call this coffee. And we're going to create a record type here. We're using Java 17, so we can go ahead and take advantage of that. I'm going to create an integer ID, a string name, and a string. Actually, we're going to have this as a size of size. So this will be an enum. We'll go ahead and create an enum size inside of model. And in here, we'll have a few values, short, tall, grande, and venti. So those are my sizes. Now I have my model. Next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and create a coffee controller. So let's go ahead and create a new, we didn't get that in the main package. That will cause us a problem later. So let's make sure that's there. Let's create a new package. We'll call this controller. And inside a controller, we'll create a new Java class and we'll call this coffee controller. Again, that's by convention. You don't need to call it that, but you'll see that often in Spring applications, just using that convention of the controller suffix. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this as a REST controller. This just says, hey, I can go ahead and accept requests and return responses. I'm going to go ahead and set a request mapping of /API/coffee. Don't mind those hints that are coming up, those little gray hints as I start to type. That's GitHub Copilot. I can go ahead and turn it off here if I want, but I like showing off sometimes, so I'll leave it on for today. So we need to go ahead and create a list of coffees, and we need to, I'm going to paste some code in here so we don't have to watch me type this. So I have a private list of coffees. We'll call this coffee list. This will be array list, and we'll just add 3 different coffees to there. So we add an ID of 1, 2, 3. We have our names here: Americano, Latte, Macchiato, Grande, Venti, and Tall. So now that we have some coffees here, again, this is just for the demo. At some point, you would extract this out into a service or a repository, talk to a database, etc. We're just going to kind of keep this pretty simple for this demo. So I'm going to set a Git mapping, and what we're going to do here is return all of those coffees. So I'm going to say coffee. We'll call this find all, and we'll return our coffee list. So that will be our find all, and then we'll also have a delete mapping. So public void delete, and if you wanted to delete one, say by a specific ID, we'll say integer ID, and then we can say coffee list. Yeah, that actually looks pretty good. Thank you, Copilot, for helping me out there. So now I just want to go ahead and run this application. So if we go ahead and run it, we can say run here. Let's run our application, and we should see no errors. Now we can go ahead and head back over to the browser. And if we go to localhost 8080/API/coffee, we should see the list of 3 coffees. Now you can also do this by heading over to some tool like Postman, And in Postman, you'll kind of get those coffees back as well. So to explain CORS a little bit further, I've copied in a new application, a front-end application into source main in a folder called front-end. You can find it in the GitHub repository that is in the description below. But I just want to walk through this real quick. I didn't want to take the time to go ahead and type this out together. It would have just kind of added a whole bunch of fluff to the video. So this is a Vue application that is using Vite. So Vite is this really great tool that you can use to build a whole bunch of different projects, Vue being one of them. So in here, we have our Vite project. We have our package.json. You can see it just includes Vite. We'll go ahead and cancel that for now. It includes Vue, and then it has Vite for the dev dependencies. Inside of source, we have an app.vue, and this is the only component that we're using right here. And we'll talk about this code a little bit more, I guess. So what happens is we have a list of coffees. When this component is mounted, we'll use the fetch API to reach out to localhost 8080/API/coffee. That is the one that we just used before. We don't really care about this authorization header right now. In fact, we can go ahead and comment that out. That will make more sense once we get into kind of the security stuff. So I can actually just get rid of that altogether. So once we reach out to that, then we're going to get some response back. We're going to turn that response into JSON. Then we'll take that data that we get back and we'll set the coffees.value equal to the data. And then we'll simply just iterate over that list and display the name of the coffee. A very simple front-end app, but we need this app to kind of talk about the issue of CORS. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up a terminal here and we'll go ahead and move into source. Oops, sorry about that. Main front end, and what we need to do is just npm install. All right, and then I also want to make sure my application is still running. It was not, so it was stopped. So I need this running first because I'm going to call a localhost 8080. So we want to make sure that this is running, and it is. So if we head back to the terminal, now what we can do is go ahead and npm run dev. And it is now running on localhost 5173. So let's go ahead and open that up in a browser. All right, and as you can see, we have this coffee list, but we don't have our list of coffees. So if we go ahead and inspect the page, head over to the console, you see that we're going to get some errors. And I'm sure this is probably, if you've done any kind of client server, front end, back end, you've probably seen this error before. Access to fetch localhost 8080/API/coffee from a different origin has been blocked by the CORS policy. So this is saying, hey, this is specifically a CORS issue. You are not allowed to access this API from this origin, because those are two different origins. Localhost 5173, localhost 8080, even though they're the same domain, localhost, they are in different ports. So this is where CORS will kick in and say, nope, you're not allowed to do that. So if you're unfamiliar with CORS, I thought I'd go ahead and share this link with you as well over on the Mozilla network. This is a really great document that goes through what cross-origin resource sharing is. Basically, it's a header-based mechanism that allows a server to indicate that any origins, whether it's the domain, scheme, port, other than its own, from which a browser should be allowed to load those resources, right? So this is, CORS relies on a mechanism which browsers make a pre-flight request. So this is like a quick request saying, hey, do I have access to this? And then in this case, the answer was no. So if we go back to the browser and we refresh localhost 8080, that still works. Again, same origin, so it doesn't matter. But as soon as you cross origins, now we need a way in our application to say that we are going to permit localhost 5173 or any or all origins to go ahead and access this resource. So with that little background on CORS, I think we can talk about how we can do this in our Spring application now. All right, so I'm going to go back into my Java application here, and I'm going to open the coffee controller. And there's an annotation that we can use to go ahead and configure CORS, and that is the cross-origin annotation. So this can be marked at the class level or at a method level. So let's take a look at it at the class level. So we're going to say cross-origin, and then you see we're getting some hints there, but I'm not going to add any more configuration to it. I'm just going to save this and head back over to the browser. Actually, we need to go ahead and restart this application for those effects to take place. So let's restart our Spring application, go back to the browser and refresh this. And as you can see, no more CORS error, right? We are not getting a CORS error. We are able to list out those 3 different coffees. And that's because at the class level, we said anything in this class, I want you to go ahead and make available to anyone calling this. Now, as we saw, let's go ahead and look into this annotation a little bit further. And we can see some deprecated stuff up here, but we can also see that there is so the value for, is an alias for origin. So if you don't type in origin equals, the default string that you put inside of that annotation will be for origins. But origins is a list of origins for which cross-origin requests are allowed. So if we didn't want to allow just anybody to hit this, we can go ahead and say origins is equal to, and then the domain/port of where we want to allow access to this. Now I know I'm not running on 3000 right now, but I want to show this, right? So if I go ahead and refresh this, restart the Spring application, head back to the browser, now we're going to get that cross-origin error again because we are on 5173, not 3000. So if we go ahead and change this to the specific one that we want to allow, so we want to open up 5173, go ahead and save this and restart this. We can go ahead and refresh this, and that will now work. So far so good. Now you can add multiple origins in there if you want. Again, I probably, unless you want it to be open to the public, I would be very specific. Maybe there's just a set of services on your application that are allowed to access it. Go ahead and lock it down to those. Now, if we don't want to set it here at the class, which gives a basic blanket statement for everything that's in this class, what if we wanted to get a little bit more granular? What if we wanted to say that, like, hey, anybody can go ahead and access this find all, but maybe we have an internal app for admin stuff like deleting or updating or creating. We can get a little bit more granular at the method level. So let's go ahead and say cross origin. So we're basically saying anybody can get to this find all method, but hey, cross origin, we want to go ahead and say that we do have a local host 3000 app that is allowed to access this, this particular delete method. So if we were to go ahead and restart this and go back to our browser, now we can at least get to that specific Git mapping that allows us to list all of them. So this is a way that we can do it there. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these. And what I want to talk about is, this is fine for this one controller because we had one controller. Now, when we get into large applications, you may not want to have to like sit here and, add these different annotations to each controller class or each method that you're trying to configure. So the next option that we have is to create a global configuration. All right, so to create my configuration, I'm going to go in here and create a new package. We'll call this config. And I'm going to create a new class in here called web MVC config. And we're going to implement the web MVC configurer. Look, it already added a whole bunch of code for me, which is nice. And so what this will allow us to do is we can override a specific method called add CORS mapping, and that brings in the CORS registry. And then we can allow, we can set mappings for specific things. So in my case, maybe I want to do this for everything, but maybe I want to just do it for API/coffee. I want to go ahead and allow 5173. And you can set the allowed methods. You can also do some other things in here, like we'll get into like allowed headers. So if you're passing specific headers like authorization, and then allow credentials. So we don't need the credentials now, but that should give us everything we need. So we're setting the allowed origins. We're setting the allowed methods. Let's just say, we can say head. We don't even need those. So let's just say get is what we're allowing for now. Okay, so that will give us the kind of global configuration. So we can come in and add all kinds of mappings here for different paths, for different origins, etc. So this gives us one place that we can set all of this. So now with that in place, we don't have any cross-origin annotations on our methods or our coffee controller. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and see if, oops, and I realized I just forgot the configuration annotation, which we'll need so this gets picked up. If not, this configuration would never get picked up. So if we head back over to the browser and refresh this, we can now see our 3 coffees. So far so good. You may have known a lot of this was available, but I thought just a quick refresher on CORS configuration before we jump into the security bits. All right, so what we're gonna do is go into our POM here. Again, we didn't add these security bits at the beginning. I'll go ahead and add that now. So we'll just say Spring Boot starter security from springframework.boot. We'll save that. We'll reload Maven so that picks up those changes, downloads that dependencies, and we are ready to go. So I'm going to come into my config package. I'm going to create a new Java class. We'll call this security config. If you've been following me along lately in my tutorials, you probably have seen me do this a lot lately. We're going to start with @configuration @enable web security. We used to extend an abstract class called web security configure adapter. We don't do that anymore. We've moved to a more component-based model. So here we're going to create our users and our security configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly add a user so you don't have to watch me type that out. That just gives me an in-memory user used for testing. Do not do this in production. And now I'm going to create a new bean of type security filter chain. And we'll call this security filter chain. This will take in our HTTP security. We'll call this HTTP. And then ultimately this is going to return http.build. This will also throw an exception. And here's where we go in and customize our security. So we might have something for authorized requests. So we might say something like, go ahead and lock down any request and make sure that you are an authenticated user if you are viewing that. So that will give us exactly what we need there. We may use something like HTTP basic here, and we'll just use the with defaults. And that is what a normal configuration will look like. So what I want to do is stop and restart this. We still have our web MVC config in place. So this should allow us to hit the application from our front-end application. So if we go ahead and refresh this, something is happening here. It is no longer working. So access to fetch at our localhost 8080 is not available on 5173. So the reason this is happening, and I'll leave the link to the documentation in the description below, is it says here, Spring Framework provides first-class support for CORS, but CORS must be processed before the Spring security because of the pre-flight request that we talked about will not contain any cookies. If the request does not contain any cookies and Spring security is first, the request will determine that the user is not authenticated since there are no cookies and reject it. This kind of documentation just goes into exactly what we're going to cover here, but we'll start with the CORS and using the defaults. So the first thing we need to do is we need to come in here and we need to say CORS, and what we got to say is with defaults. And what we're saying there with defaults is this with defaults now is saying, okay, I'm going to by default use a bean by the name of CORS configuration source. So we need a bean of this type of this name to go ahead and set up CORS configuration. So now here in our security configuration, I'll create a new bean. This will be CORS configuration source, and we'll name the bean the same. So by default, unless we come in here and give it a specific name, it's going to use the method name, and that's the exact one that we're looking for. So what I'm going to do is just paste in some configuration here, and we'll talk about it. So this is creating a CORS configuration, so new CORS configuration. It's setting the allowed origins. So just like we did before, we're setting the allowed origins. This can be a list, so we're just passing in one for now. This can also have methods, so we're saying go ahead and set those methods as well. You can also go ahead and set allowed headers. So if we wanted to pass in a header like we do in our front end, we can go ahead and set that authorization header to match that username and password. So then we're going to say the URL, this is coming from web CORS. And again, we saw a reactive option in there as well. This will work in the reactive world. So we're setting the configuration for /*, and then passing in our configuration. So all in all, even if this looks a little confusing, this is just another way to configure CORS. When you're using Spring Security, this is the approach that you need to take. So what I'm going to do is come in here and basically say, I don't even need this class anymore. So I'll go ahead and get rid of it. That's okay. We don't need it. This is what I want to use. And then, so I don't know if I can go ahead and back this change out. Yeah, so, all right, sorry about that. I had a quick typo here in my unmounted hook. Just gonna go ahead and rerun this application here, and our backend is running. And if we run this again, we should be able to see a list of coffee names. So cool. Just to kind of recap, we took a look at different ways that we can configure CORS. We can do this a couple different ways. So when we're talking about just configuring it on the back end, we can go ahead and work on the controller. So we can go ahead and add our cross-origin annotation at the controller level, at the method level. We can even create a configuration, which we saw earlier, that MVC config, to do global configuration across multiple controllers for all the different things, origins, headers, etc. When we add Spring Security in there and we talk about using our Spring Security config, we need to add this .cors. This will say, when we say customize our with defaults, we're saying, hey, by default, we're going to look for a bean of name CORS configuration source. So I created a bean with that name and I set up my configuration. I set up my allowed origins, my methods, my headers, etc. So I really hope you enjoyed this. This was kind of a walk down on how to configure CORS, what it is, why we need to worry about it, how we deal with it when we're involving security in our application. So if you did enjoy this, do me a big favor, friends. Go ahead and leave me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and as always, happy coding.